Good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. You're very welcome this morning to our webinar on approximation and estimation, uses in real life, including money and cooking. And we're delighted to have Mary Reardon here facilitating this morning. Mary is a numeracy tutor with Limerick and Clare ETB. So over to you, Mary Ann. All the best.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. So I'm going to apologise firstly for my title being slightly different to the one you had advertised, which was rounding and approximation. But I thought, well, how do we approximate? We use rounding. So I dropped that from the title unilaterally. So why do we use it? Why is approximation important? Isn't maths all about the exact answer? So actually, approximation in mathematics is such an important area. There is a whole separate branch of mathematics to deal with approximation. And this comes into every area that we would use. So within statistics, engineering, all sorts of different things. It's a huge branch of mathematics. So we often think, as I just said, isn't it about getting the right answer? Everyone has this misconception about maths that, oh, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. But that's not the truth. The truth is that it's about not just numbers, but about measurement, about ratio, about logic. And problem solving. So how do you break down a big problem into smaller problems and solve those? And it's about finding patterns. So anyone who's had a child at primary school and you've had the 100 circle coming back to you, or the 100 square, I'm sorry, and they fill in every second or every third or every fourth square, and you see the repetition of the ending of the number. Okay, so it is largely about patterns, okay? And certainly the way we interact with mathematics on an everyday basis is more about approximation. But there are some areas where we do need exact figures, and that is when we're paying bills, mostly to do with money. When we're paying bills, if you have to deal with a tax man, which we all do, keeping control of your bank accounts. So have you got enough money to meet what's going out? If you're shopping, you deal in exact amounts. The thing is, though, that we need a guide to these things. We like to deal in kind of averages, if you like, and it's something that we do all the time. So what has made the money part easier for us is that more and more people are using cards now, but you still have to have an idea of how much money you're spending. But using a card, tapping has eliminated for most people the idea of having the correct money and getting the correct change and that kind of thing. So we've all seen these examples before, and we go into a shop, we have X amount of money to pay, and you're in a rush. That's what real life is like. You're in a rush, you have to get out, and you have to quickly work out, have you got enough money? So if we look at this, how would we round it? Okay, so most people would round to the nearest euro. So if it's 250 and up, we round up. If it was 249, we would round down. So we're looking at each of these things and we come up with 25, which is luckily the amount of money that we had to spend. Now, so there are so many resources for this. I didn't put too many up. NALA themselves have amazing resources, but one resource that I like to use a lot of the time is bbc.co.uk, Bite Size. They have many worksheets. They have lots of videos. And why would I use this children's site for adults? Well, it's quite easy and simple to explain. Very often, learners will not willingly admit if they have shortcomings in a certain area. But what we do at Limerick and Clare ETB through core skills is we help parents help their children. So I would go into primary schools and help parents understand the maths their children are doing, and in secondary school and the same thing. So I like to help adults by showing them how to help children. And the BBC Bite Size, you can see I've included the link there. Not only has worksheets and pictures, but little videos. And I find through my own experience, 19 years of doing this with the ETB, VEC as was, is that parents are much more open, or aunties or grandparents, anyone who has a child anywhere in their life is much more open to experiencing learning about mathematics this way if they feel what they're really doing is preparing to help a child. Okay, so rounding's a really valuable tool for us. So if we think about the numbers we have to deal with every day, okay, they're not just regular small numbers going shopping, but we have to think about population sizes, comparing the population in Ireland 20 years ago with the population today. How do we know what the population is anyway? How can you ever say the population is a certain number? People are being born all the time, people are dying all the time, people are coming into the country, getting citizenship, people are leaving the country and going elsewhere. So it can be very useful. And why could it be useful to understand population sizes? Well, if we look at membership of the EU and we look at our contributions and what we get out of the EU, it's very interesting to see how much do we pay in comparison to a country that might be, I don't know, 10, 11 times our population. Okay, so it's very important to get to grasp with using money or whatever, the idea of rounding to get approximate figures to understand data, because it's essential for our students to understand, bigger figures. And this is an easy way to introduce them to that. So it really, for me, rounding is a great, useful, everyday tool. But for me, the main thing is that we help our learners, our students, become active citizens in the community. So most of them are going to be able to vote, okay? Political parties, when it comes to an election or when there's a problem or when there's a dispute, they put out lots of figures there, and it can be very difficult to understand what they're talking about. It's very, especially for some of our learners at level 2, especially, they, millions and billions might not mean anything to them. So we need a shortcut way, if we can round to get approximations for smaller figures. We can apply exactly the same principle to larger figures to make them more easily understood. So we're always getting things to do with employment levels, unemployment levels, the amount of public spending, how much is being spent on the HSE, on education and all the rest of it. So if the government was to say, and I use this very tongue-in-cheek, that unemployment has halved, has it really? And is it true that one country has, maybe the UK has 10 times our population or 4 times our population or whatever? Okay, so where the rounding in money takes me with my students is to look at place value. Now, this is hugely, hugely important, because it is going to introduce the idea of very large numbers that our learners might not be familiar with. They hear billion and it's like, what is that? You know? So without any frame of reference, it's very difficult. So to understand that when we go to the left, we multiply by 10 in our decimal system. And when we go to the right, we divide by 10. So this also has a very big impact for understanding powers of numbers and indices. So if we were to look at 10, 10 to the power 1 is 10. 10 times itself twice, 10 squared is 100. We have 2 zeros. Multiply by 10 again, that's 10 by 10 by 10. 10 cubed is 1 with 3 zeros, and so on. And every time we go to the left, we can see that we're adding another 0. And the number of zeros is the number of times we have multiplied by 10. Okay. So this takes us to a very interesting point that comes up. Well, maybe our students won't go on to do Leaving Cert, maybe they will. But if we multiply by 10 and add a power when we go to the left, what about when we go to the right? So if we look at our 1,000, that is 10 to the power 3. And we go to the right one place, we have 10 to the power 2, and then 10 to the power 1. But what about the unit? Well, if we follow the pattern, and this is what I'm talking about, numbers having patterns, mathematics being involved with patterns, is we also have a concept that can be very difficult to understand, but which we can introduce our learners to, even at level 2 and 3. 10 to the power 1 is 10. If you divide that by 10, 10 to the power 0 is 1. And that will open up for any of our students the idea that any number to the power 0 is 1. So it can be a useful tool to put out there. Students who want to progress will have this in the back of their mind when they go forward. Okay, so we get used to this idea. So what is a million? It's 1,000 times 1,000. If you had 1,000 people and gave each one €1,000. Okay, what about a million? Sorry, that was a million. 1,000 people and €1,000. What is a billion then? So if we had 1,000,000 people and we gave each of them €1,000, or if we had 1,000,000 people gave each 1,000, or 1,000 people and gave each of them 1,000,000, this now brings into real life the understanding of what the magnitude is of a billion. So I was talking about numbers being difficult to understand, and sometimes we can't get an exact number, so we have to round. It's impossible not to. So I went on to a world population site last night, and I screenshot, the figures are moving all the time on this site. I screenshot twice in less than a second. And you can see the figures are different for both of these. Now they will be completely different. But what can I say about this? I can say the current world population is about 8 billion. Do I need to be exact? No, I don't. Why don't I need to be exact? Because the number is only correct at any one point in time. And in a split second, it will change. Somebody will die, somebody will be born, and so on. So with these large numbers, it's very important to understand rounding is important. So look at the births. Look at the births. So in less than a second, there were how many? 15 births in less than a second. I know this is a very short time and these are quite small differences, but imagine trying to compare a 2023 figure with a 2020 figure. There's no way. Where do you pick the figure from? You'd have to look at an amount to the nearest 100,000 or to the nearest million or to the nearest billion, because it just wouldn't be possible. So births, there were about 328,000, or maybe one might say just under 330,000. How many deaths were there? Just under 150,000. Okay, so not possible. These figures are not possible to calculate. Okay, most importantly, we all have to eat, and we all cook. Well, most of us cook. So how do we prepare our food? Well, there's a big thing about cookery shows, isn't there? And celebrity chefs are bringing out their cookery books all the time. Why do they do that? Because we watch TV and we look at that food and we want to replicate that recipe. How could we replicate it unless we knew exactly how they did it? So they give us exact amounts, exact weights, exact volumes of liquid. So what do you do if your scales are broken, or you don't have scales, or you don't have a measuring jug? How are you supposed to do this? So you've watched, I don't know, Nigella Lawson preparing something, and you've just got to cook it, and you can't. You've got all the ingredients, but you don't have anything to measure with. So I looked at a very simple recipe, and this was to make sponge cake, and each one of these made a double layer of sponge, so you could fill it with cream and fruit, whatever you wanted. Okay, so I thought to myself, how would I know how much butter, sugar, blah, blah, blah I needed? Okay, how do I get an approximation for these if I don't have a scales? Also, look at this. We have 4 large eggs. Are large eggs all exactly the same? And half of a lemon zested. All lemons are not the same size. So there is an approximation right there in the recipe. And of course, we've all seen recipes where it's a pinch of salt, a dash of Worcester sauce, or whatever. Okay, so there is the link for that recipe as well. And I was wondering, how would I do it? So I actually went and looked at a very good website, chefindisguise.com, and they've got great ideas for approximating weights and measures for cooking. So I'm going to show you the list now in a minute, but from this, I deduced that 225 grams of butter was 16 tablespoons, as was the caster sugar, 16 tablespoons. And then I got down to my self-raising flour, which was about 16 tablespoons. Now, these are slightly heaped. So how do I remember how to do this? Okay, well, for every 4 tablespoons of flour, I have a large egg. So there's a ratio, flour, 4:1. All of the dry ingredients are the same. So if I'm looking butter, sugar, flour, 4, 4, 4, and 1 egg. So there's a ratio. If I want to add flavoring with vanilla extract or lemon, that's a thing that one would do to taste. So I now have a basic recipe for my sponge that I just have to remember the ratios for. Okay, so these are the tables. I know it's very difficult to see, but these are the tables that came from the Chef in Disguise website, and these are conversion tables. Okay, so I went 14.3 grams is 1 tablespoon. How many times does that go into 225? And I got 16. And I'm actually going to try this recipe. I hope it works. Okay, same thing for our fluid ounces. I worked through that as well. I also checked on the website, what is the average weight of an egg? And would you believe they have, I can't actually remember it now, but I think an egg is 2 ounces. So whatever that is in grams, but that one egg equals or matches with the 4 units of the dry ingredients. Okay. So cooking, we all do shortcuts for cooking, okay? We put in a bit of this, a bit of that. If we're following a recipe and something is too thin, too thick, we adjust it automatically, okay? But there are also times in life when we have to round up. We have to know a minimum that we can get. So if we're splitting a bill or ordering something that we can only buy full units of, so if I calculated I needed 2 1/3 tins of paint, absolutely nowhere is going to sell me 2 1/3 tins of paint. How many am I going to have to buy? I'm going to have to buy 3. What about 1.78 packets of butter? Once again, I'm going to have to round up and buy 2. Now, I know some shops sell eggs singly, but for most of us, if we go into a shop, they're sold in half dozen cartons. So if I want 7 eggs, I'm going to have to buy a dozen eggs. I'm going to have to buy 2 packets of 6. Okay, and I've given a little example here. So you're out with 5 friends, so there are 6 people. Okay, and you need a taxi will take 4 people. How many taxis do you have to order? Well, you can't order a taxi and a half, if only. So you're going to have to order 2 taxis. Then you've got to decide it's both ways. So we have a round bill there of €37, and we have 6 people to divide that bill amongst. Well, it's €6, 16 and 2/3 cents. We can't do that. So if we were to take €6 and 16 cents from each person, we're going to be short. We have to round it up, in which case we will have slightly more, and that's not including the tip. So rounding down sometimes is not an option. Okay, I know I'm taking a little bit more time than I thought. I want you to think of pi. So I was once teaching Youth Reach, and an inspector was in the classroom, and we were talking about the surface area of a circle. And a student asked me what sort of pi were we using. And we laughed it off as a joke, but it made me wonder how I could use that misconception to actually talk about pi. So if we look at the pie that I've got there, it's roughly circular. So if we were to measure around the outside, if we got a piece of string and we measured around the outside of that pie and then measured the length of string, and then we measured the widest part of the pie so we could get the string again and bring it from one side of the pie to the other and use a ruler to measure that. If we divide the outside, the longest measurement by the shortest measurement, which is the diameter, so we can bring in more words here, circumference, diameter. If we divide it, we're always going to get a number that's about 3. Okay, it might not be perfect because we're using a piece of string and a ruler or whatever, but this can introduce the idea of pi for us, for our students who are going on, and for our students who maybe aren't going to go on. This could make them feel very good that they understand this concept, because it's a very difficult concept for people to understand. Also, if we have crafts and we have knitting, a great way to understand pi is if you have a certain amount of wool left, will it cover the whole of this line, or do I have to attach more wool? If we take the free wool and bring it backwards and forwards 3 times, and we still have a little spare, we can use it. Why? Because it has to go around the needle, and the width of the stitch is the diameter of the needle. So we're looking at the diameter of the needle by all the stitches, which is the width of the knitting, by 3 is the amount of wool that you needed to go around the needle. So we're using pi there. Okay, I really need to rush on now. So I have some tasks, and they're not too difficult, but unfortunately I've made them quite detailed. So I'm looking at a similar shopping bag to the one before, okay? And I think it would be quite good to use this in a breakout room, that we would look at this and we would use the regular method of rounding that we all use. So 249 would become 250. 250. No, in 50 cents would become 250. In euros, it would be €2. 148 is very close to 150, and if we were rounding to the nearest 50 cent, that would be 150. But if we're rounding to the nearest euro, that becomes €1, and so on down. So now, if we round them and we get a figure, do we have enough? And if we add up the exact figures, how much is it really? And is there an advantage or a disadvantage to rounding? And how can we overcome it? Okay. So there is another task that I'm leaving there, but you can look at your own leisure. The third task, and I've just put all my ideas on here, and I think this would be great for a breakout room as well, is how do we use approximation? This is basically what the whole thing is. How do we use approximation in our kitchens? How do we use it in our cookery kitchens when we're doing courses? Do we always have the measurements? What if the scale stops working? How do you know if an egg is a large egg or a very large egg or an extra large egg? How do you do measurement at home? Did you learn a recipe from your mom or your granny? What measurements did they use? And also, I think, just to round this up, I'm sorry to take so long, Fergus, is we have learners from so many different countries now. Wow, what a great opportunity to find the way they do things. Maybe they use like a handful of something means something, or a pinch means something to them. So I think they're two great tasks for breakout rooms, if we could do those. And I would also ask, could you, when you go into your breakout room, could you decide on a person who is going to feed back at the end, so that I can see how interested you were or what you got from the tasks? Be very interested to learn from you. Okay. Is everybody back?
Yeah, two or three people had to leave to go to classes.
That's okay. I saw that in the chat.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. I hope you don't mind me going ahead, but I'm very interested to hear feedback from the groups and what they thought. I know they were simple ideas that I gave, but sometimes you've got to focus down on one area, and then we can use that in a wider context. So I'm interested to get feedback from the groups, if that's okay.
So group one, is it Imelda?
So I've been in the group with Mary, so I can certainly repeat what I said to Mary directly if you like.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. No, I love some of the ideas. I'm a home ec teacher, but I find myself teaching maths. So I do find it challenging, but as I was saying to Mary, one of my biggest challenges is motivating them to get interested in the maths. So Mary had a lovely idea there, a suggestion that you look at the golden ratio. It's around makeup for girls. So that's certainly one I'll be looking into. And looking at nutrition for traveller lads, trying to motivate them to do maths when it comes to boxing and so on. So yeah, some lovely ideas. I also really enjoyed the cookery related things, because that's my first subject. And even I wasn't aware that pi is comes from the ratio of the circumference on the circle. So that's new to me. So yeah, thank you. Think that's about it. We got a little flash of the answers to the rounding of the shopping list, so we had a bit of a heads up as to what was coming on that one. But we just discussed the fact that rounding to the 50 cent as opposed to the full euro was probably the best way to go when they were so close to the 50 cent mark. That was it, I think. We had a mention of the ballpark figure coming from the Gaelic football reference, and that's yeah, can certainly be introduced into maths as well. That's it for me, I think.
Okay, group 2, who's going to feedback from group 2?
I think I can. Yeah.
Thanks, Terry.
Or Aoife, if you'd like to, you might have a better take.
No, work away.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah. Task 1, rounding. We didn't really get to compare or to see the answers. So I just did it on my own and struggled through it. So we'll see what the answers. And then it was very good, actually, just looking at the price list as something quite simple to introduce to a class, and the rounding off of, to teach that rounding of numbers. What else? Yeah, and the baking references and applying it to baking was really interesting. We didn't really have a lot of information about how it was done in the past, or, you know, Eve and I were just saying about rounding, or, you know, whether you use a heaped teaspoonful or a flat, which is a liquid. And we tend to go for the heaped tablespoonfuls, teaspoonfuls. Yeah, and I was saying how it was really difficult for me sometimes to, if I get a recipe and then trying to transfer the ingredients, to switch from one ingredient to another, and, you know, sometimes I'll have to call people up and find out, you know, if I haven't got the measurements on my jug. So that can be very frustrating, I think, when you don't, you know, try to compare measurements or work them out.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of it, really. We just talked about the past, about what I remember would have been more cups, using cups as measurements, and what she remembers more from her mum was more to do with tablespoonfuls and teaspoons, which were fairly accurate.
Yeah.
And also she mentioned how bite size was actually very interesting, and
It's excellent. And
great.
definitely, if you have adult learners, they really open up when you show them ways to help their children or their grandchildren or whatever. They are less aware of their own failings, as they might see them, or their own weaknesses. It's like, I'm doing this to help somebody else, so I've got to look at it from this basic viewpoint. Sometimes they're more willing to do that. Also, I'd be really interested, the home ec teacher, was it Imelda?
Yes, Mary.
I would be really interested, Imelda, if you or any home ec teacher actually did a recipe through the exact measurements and one through the approximations to see how they fared. And how would you have to jiggle things? Would you look at a tablespoon, in a different light? Would a tablespoon mean something different? Would it be very heaped? Would it be flatter? Would it be completely flat? I don't know. So I'd be very interested to get feedback on that.
I suppose just very quickly to say, in home ec, unless a recipe states otherwise, a teaspoon or a tablespoon or dessert spoon is always considered a heaped. So it's a heaped spoon unless it says otherwise. It's just always considered that it's a heaped one.
Yeah.
But just in relation to what you said about using children's resources with adults, I love that idea. Because, as you say, you can very much sell the simple resource to an older person who has children in their life. I work with older teenagers, and they get very insulted if I bring in things that were clearly designed for children. So it doesn't help me with my own group, but I can see very much how it would help people if they are working with children.
Yeah. Well, you know, Imelda, I am working on some resources for my own colleagues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to email them possibly next week to Fergus, if he'll accept that.
Yes.
And maybe he could share it with the group that was on today. Would that be okay, Fergus?
Perfect. Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Thanks.
Yeah, and I will include in that the makeup thing for the teenage girls. It's to do with the golden ratio, and it comes into art. It comes into all sorts of design.
You're breaking up on it there, Mary.
Oh, sorry, darling.
Just you repeat that again about the golden ratio.
The golden ratio, I used it to teach teenage girls that when they put their makeup on, they're doing mathematics. And this golden ratio comes into art and lots of other design type areas. So I will include that in the list, and you get that maybe Thursday of next week, if that's okay.
Fantastic. I'll email it on to everyone who registered for this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Mary, I
So-
see a question here from C. O'Mahony. Can we have the name of the makeup reference again? Is that the golden
So
ratio?
that was the golden ratio. So
That
a great
Fibonacci
way-
or what is it? Something like that?
the
No.
Fibonacci sequence, yeah.
Okay.
So in art, they have a thing called thirds in art and photography. So they split the screen, or they split their canvas up into thirds, which is really an approximation. Getting back to our thing, it's an approximation for the golden ratio, which is 1.61, blah, blah, blah. So it's an approximation for this in art. But this golden ratio, you can use it in growing plants, you can use it in art, make anything that has a design feature to it, you can use it. It's even relates to the way plants grow, all this kind of thing. And I find sometimes when a person doing a lower level, like say maybe a level 2 or 3, when they learn something that they think other people don't automatically know, that makes them feel so good. And they have this thing, it's like the pie. Oh my God, the number of Leaving Cert students that still don't understand what pi is. But if you can teach somebody, just measure this pi, they've got it, and it really does boost confidence.
If anyone else has any other questions for Mary, just unmute and ask Mary now.
They're very undemanding.
Or Mary, is there anything else you want to finish up with? Anything else you want to say?
I've just scratched the surface of it. You know, for me, we all need to round, we all need to approximate in every day. But for me, the big issue has been with my students is to enable them to be active citizens and to understand data that is put out there, that it is approximated by rounding, how it's rounded, and how we can use that to compare to other pieces of information that are out there.
Okay, great. Mary, we might finish up there then, if that's okay. So
Perfect.
it just leaves me to say thanks very much to Mary for some great preparation and great delivery, and there are lots of ideas for you there. I hope you got something from it and we'll use some things in the numeracy classroom. And there, C. O'Mahony saying looking forward to your teaching resource next week, Mary, so that's good. And if anyone's interested, tomorrow we have a webinar at 1 o'clock on comparing offers from 3 mobile phone companies. And Sheila Clary is facilitating that. And then on Thursday and Friday, the webinars are at 11. So on Thursday morning, Cathy O'Sullivan from University of Galway is looking at numeracy in the media and kind of fake news as well. And a bit of rounding approximation could come in there. I'm not exactly sure. And then on Friday morning, 2 of the people who were on this webinar at the beginning, Elaine and Sharon, are looking at making maths relevant. So that's at 11 on Friday morning. So Mary, thanks again. That was great, really well prepped and lots of good ideas, tips and all. And I'll send on Mary's presentation to everybody today. And you can look at it again on task 2. You can look at, there's more detail there on task 2. You can have a look at that. And then next week I'll send on Mary's resources. So thanks, Mary. Thanks, Eve, for helping. I said you'd have to do nothing and you had to do a lot. So thanks for that. And so thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully see you later in the week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mary. That was well worth joining for. Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.